All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Greg Feliu, and I'm presenting on the busiest subway lines ranked estimating New York City subway line ridership using MTA open data. So as we all know, the New York City subway system is a massive, complex, and complicated system. So we have about 28 different lines, services, I'm going to use that term interchangeably, across two different completely incompatible systems, the A division, the numbered lines, and the B division, the lettered lines. So, if you see my topic, you say, well, I don't want to listen to this entire talk. Why don't I just find out the answer myself? Why don't I just Google it? What do you find? So in general, you get very general stats, right? So you see over, it's an entire year. Here's how many people entered the system. That's nice, but that's not the question I was asking. And so, obviously I tried every permutation of this Google search that I could. And I kind of have four categories of what I found. So if you look at the top left, I have like system level stats, like you just saw there, 1.2 billion, 1 point whatever billion people enter the system. That's great. On the top right, we have segment level stats, technically, lines. So in this example, Lexington Avenue line has 1.3 million riders per day. But again, I'm asking about like the 4, 5, and 6 trains. So that's helpful, but not exactly what I'm looking for. In the bottom left, we have complex level stats. So multiple stations form a complex. So for example, Hoyt-Schermerhorn, right around the corner from here. No, sorry, that's a bad example. Metropolitan Lorimer, the L and the G train. You can enter in one fare control, but you can go to either, and the system, we have no idea which one you're taking. So even if we know how many people enter that station, I don't know how to allocate how many people are entering the L versus the G trains. And finally, sporadically, I get the answer I'm looking for, this line level stats. So usually in support of projects or improvements within the system, we'll get kind of what the MTA knows about a certain line. So this one came out in a construction newsletter about 2 months ago. But again, this is the A and C trains, daily ridership. That doesn't tell me the year, doesn't tell me which one in particular. So it's a little difficult. We also have this beautiful thing called AI. You think, okay, that'll give us the answer. And it directs you to my talk. So as my favorite rapper, named after 2 subway lines, once said, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Greg Feliu, and today I'll be presenting about the busiest subway lines in New York City. So, in a broad stroke, what I did in my project was I took the kind of operations, the actual ridership, the frequency and the train arrivals per station, and divided ridership equally among those. So I don't really take into account the destinations, where people are going. All I know is within a certain hour, people enter this complex, and these trains enter that complex, and then I divide it equally. And even if you're not particularly interested in this topic in particular, I think you should still listen to my talk because sometimes you really do need to think outside the box to get to like seemingly simple questions. So we tried Googling, that didn't work. The MTA has an amazing open data program. So they have data on all kinds of different aspects of the system. So the most obvious one to use would be entries at the complex level. And so if we did a very simple model, we could take one station, we know how many services enter that station. So why don't we just divide it equally? Can anyone think of why that might be a bad idea? Just feel free to shout them out.
Trains are more frequent.
So some trains are more frequent. That's certainly true. Anybody else?
Maybe if two lines have a different number of stations in total, then you could have like a distortion of the total result of the line.
Yeah. So here I'm thinking of taking that ridership data per complex and then dividing that across the 3 lines. So if we do the same process for each and every complex, like if we sum that up, we would get the line total. So like specifically, with Hoyt-Squirmer-Horn, do you, intuitively, do you think equal number of people are using all 3 stations? Say that again? Yeah, that's true. If I arrive there at midnight, would I be able to get a C train? Nope. So the time of day, like the routes change, late night schedule, weekend schedules, a route doesn't actually follow what it says on the daytime weekday map. So in that screenshot I showed before with our friend AI, another Reddit user tried to do this approach. And I'll just take, one screenshot of kind of the final table that they provided. Sorry, it isn't coming up, but so for example, for the J and Z trains in Manhattan, they said that the J and Z trains had the exact same number of riders. Does that sound right? Why not? The Z doesn't exist. That's fine. There's only 5 trips per direction per day on the Z train. So unless these trains are extremely, extremely packed, I doubt they're carrying the same number of people. Okay. So just to recap some of the things we looked at, the part-time services, why should we give credit to, like a 5 train that isn't running its full route? So, at late night, the 5 train has a very shortened route in the Bronx. So, Manhattan shouldn't, people entering, Times Square, Grand Central shouldn't be counted towards the 5 train. Also, like what counts as a service? There's express variants of every line, or not every line, but of a lot of lines. So, whether you count it as 1 or 2, that would really throw off your results. And, the amount of the frequency of each line isn't the same. The L train is far more frequent than the G train, so we need some way to give more credit to the L train than we do for the G train if they arrive at the same station. So I thought, this didn't work. I'll do it myself. So yeah, I have 2 main data sources I'm using here. I'm getting ridership data from for the complexes. There are a couple different data sets you can choose from, but I'm kind of worried about general averages across the whole year. So I got the origin destination data set. And for the schedule, there's actually 2 variants you can use. There's the planned schedule, and then there's the real time, like what actually happens. For simplicity, I just used the static schedule. And both of these have the granularity of the hour and day level. So at Mondays at 8 a.m., this many people entered the station, and I can say how many people planned, or how many trains planned to enter that station. So, if you work with transit data, it can be pretty difficult. There are a couple of difficulties with the ridership data, right? It's at the complex level, not the station. So if 2 different lines go to different stations at that complex, I don't know which one to assign the ridership to. And also, this data set itself is massive. If you look at the entire year at every complex and, all the way, 3.7 million rows. So kind of a challenge to work with. Also made some assumptions with the schedule. So they release the schedule multiple times a year. I just took one schedule and pretended that applied to the entire year. And again, this doesn't account for short-term work. Late nights from this day to this day, the X train isn't running, whatever. I don't really take that into account. So since I'm looking at like averages, this all includes weekend work, also not including that. And if you take one kind of thought from my presentation, it would be like scaling. So the granularity of what you look at, I'm constantly playing with in this project. Right, so for the ridership, I'm looking at hour and day by complex. And for the schedule, I'm looking at hour a day by station. And then we're scaling this up to the year level. So I'm going to go through my process once. We'll go through an example, and then, I'll get a little bit more in depth into the process. So step one is for the ridership. We just pull that data. We have an hour, day, complex. Then step two is for the station frequencies. Get how many of whatever train line entered by hour and day at that station. Next up is to scale up the service frequencies, the line entries at a complex from a station to a complex. So in that Metropolitan Lorimer example, we'll find all the L and G trains that enter that complex. Then I will divide the ridership equally among those trains based on how many enter. So I'll go to that example in a second. And then essentially just get all the values and bring it to the year level, right? We have every station, every complex line ridership at a certain hour and day, scale it all the way up, and we get our answer. So yeah, Metropolitan Lorimer, Mondays, 8 a.m. On average, we see 1,250 riders. So now we need to know how often the trains arrive at that station. There's about 20 L trains that arrive at that station and about 7 G trains within that hour time frame. So if we divide this equally, we'll have 925 riders for the L and 323 riders for the G. Okay. And then I thought, this isn't the full picture. So has anyone ever ridden the G? So sorry for you. When you get to the G train, if you wait on one end of the platform, can you get on that G train?
You run.
If you run, absolutely. You get your spinning shoes. So the G train only runs 5-car trains, whereas the L runs 8-car trains. So there's more space on an L train than there is on a G train. And this is partly reflected on MTA's knowledge of demand for that line and all kinds of operational things that we don't need to get into. But I decided to actually incorporate that aspect into my project. And, if we go back to Hoyt-Schermerhorn example, if we have 2 trains arriving at the same time, if we have a crowded A train and a less crowded C train, even if I want to get on that A train, I physically may not be able to. So, I'm going to adjust my commute to get on the train that I can physically step on or is more comfortable. So I'm taking the capacity of each line into the calculations that I'm doing. So if we do that, not only are we getting the frequency of each train, we're also getting the capacity of each train. So since the L can hold more people, I'm going to give it more credit for the ridership at that station. So instead of 925 riders being assigned to the L train in this example, it'd be 1,025 riders. And, we would do the same process that we're doing. So we have it at a day hour per line and station. So sum that up to the year level. And then I added 2 more aspects that make this a little bit more representative. So when I gave that 1.2 billion entries per year, that's how many people enter the system. I mean, almost everyone here has taken the subway and had to transfer, had to, take multiple services to get to where they need to. So I'm incorporating that value into the results because I'm specifically looking at the line ridership, right? I don't, it doesn't make sense to divide my one ride into 0.3 rides on the 1, 0.3 rides on the L, whatever. So this number is going to be bigger than the entries that we get, that entries value that we get. So I'm calling this the unlinked to linked ratio. And so on average, I've found that New York City subway riders riding 1.69 lines to get to their destination. And I'm also taking into account the growth rate. So the data I had was from 2024. And we know there's this COVID rebound. We know that, there's about an 8% growth year over year, at least from 24 to 25. So I'm also multiplying every line value, every like ridership per line value to get my final result. So enough preamble. You guys want to see the results? All right. Yeah. All right, 1 second. We having trouble with the images, unfortunately. Sorry. 1 second, guys. I'll take this offline. Yeah, I didn't realize Canva doesn't show the images in the presentation. It's the unfortunate thing. No, I think it's from Canva. Yeah, but we persevere.
Thanks.
There are few tiers.
All right. Cliffhanger's over. That was planned, of course. All right. So here are the yearly ridership results. And like I said before, what counts as a service? A lot of MTA data combines the N and W trains and the J and Z trains for obvious reasons. And then all the way in the bottom there, we have the Grand Central, 42nd Street shuttle, Franklin Avenue shuttle, and the Rockaway Parkway branch. Yeah, people surprised? What's a vibe check on? Yeah. And so this is very interesting. Also, what I'm looking at is the daily ridership on each line. So only on the weekdays, how many people are riding each line? Actually, the results are slightly different. So instead of the 1 train being the highest, the 6 train is actually the highest. The reason for this is that there's kind of a higher proportion of riders on the 6 train that use it on a weekday versus the 1 train. So mildly interesting there. This is a weekday ridership. Weekday ridership.
Remind us what unlinked means. I might have missed that.
The unlinked, yeah, including transfers.
Including.
Yeah. So this is higher than the official 1 point whatever billion results riders. Okay. Okay. So, I got these results. I would love to know if they are right. So I had to grab the kind of bits and pieces of information that the MTA provides and, try and validate the results. So one way that I did this was using the A and C ridership values that I found in the construction newsletter. You add up the A and C on weekdays, I find 640,000 riders. MTA found 600,000 riders. Other examples of this, I think for the 6 train, I found one. So it was within 8% of the final results that I found. Another imperfect comparison I found was there was a peak hour crowdedness study that the MTA provided saying, at the absolute busiest time, how many people are on each train line. So when you do the ranking of each line within the MTA's study and my study, each line in my results is off by about 3 positions. So if the one, have the one train is number 1, it's something like the one train is actually in the 4th spot in the MTA study. And so there's a bit of give. But as we saw in the results, they're actually somewhat, it's very close, between them. So peak hour, yearly, very different scales, but we work with what we got. And what's really nice about my results is that you can use this to do all kinds of different analyses on your own. So if you want to know which line has the most late night ridership, you can find out that it's the F train, followed by the A train, and you can go down the list if you'd like. Just other possible questions you could ask. With my data, you can give an estimate and we can find an answer. So I saw people's faces when I showed the results. So there are some reasons I know these results are absolutely wrong, and this is not the best approach, but for a side project, it's all we can do. So I'm not taking into account destinations. And how this affects, I think this affects my data is that local lines are overvalued. Yeah, so I mean, if we go to this 4th bullet, if I wanted to go from Forest Hills to Queens Plaza, I have 3 different lines I could take, 1 local and 2 express. There's actually 2 local when I started this project. And the time difference is about, almost 10 minutes. But in my model, I'm giving them equal credit just because they simply arrive at the station. So that's one way. With this first bullet, I don't care which direction people are going. So in the Hoyt-Schermerhorn example, I think someone said the G train, doesn't go to the same destinations as the A and C train. And frankly, just there's a reason why almost every line in our system goes through Manhattan, right? Because it's just the most important destination out of all 5 boroughs. So, where people are trying to go, I don't take into account in the model, but this is kind of indirectly taken into account by the ridership per complex. And then taking in the capacity aspect, there are times people will force themselves onto a train. We know the E train in the mornings is over capacity. So people will just force themselves onto the train, whereas my model is kind of assuming people are kind of trying to go for a comfort ride, the relatively most comfortable ride they can. And then I'm sure I'd love to hear from you guys what you think the other reasons I'm wrong are. So what I think the more complicated true method would be a more sophisticated use of this origin destination model where, again, in the name of the model, we know where people are starting, where people are ending. The incredibly difficult thing to do is to calculate how they got there. Our system's incredibly interlined. You have multiple different options of how to get to where you want to go. And frankly, it's just really hard to do. Also, like I said, with the schedule, I'm only taking a 3-month period, more or less, and pretending that applies to the entire year. And we know that's not accurate. So the Rockaway shuttle gets longer trains, has a more extended route in the summer. Also, real-time GTFS schedule data. Maybe one train breaks down more than another, and it would lose ridership because of that. Frankly, just too complicated for me to take into account. So some fun things I found in my estimates. Right, so the number of riders in 2025, the A division carries a little more than 1/3 of all riders. So it's kind of overperforming, especially when you consider the fact they have smaller train sets. So more people can fit onto, say, the A train than the one train. A huge proportion of the riders arrive on weekdays. And so the absolute highest number of riders on a specific line I found was 34,000 riders on the 6th. Pretty cool stuff. And again, you can take my data and, answer all kinds of questions that I didn't even think of. Yeah, and so general takeaways. Not every problem has a kind of tried and true simple way to solve it. Sometimes you have to get creative. Also, MTA open data is fantastic, but it doesn't have absolutely everything. And, we're creative people. We can find any kinds of gaps. And the subway system is incredibly complex. And just as a bonus, you might know that, the subway builder guy is presenting after me. There are people on Discord who made a track accurate map of the New York City subway system. So, every station, everything is filled in. So I thought, what if I put realistic frequencies of each line to, this simulation and see how the results come out? And, you can play with that on the save file that I have here. But yeah, maybe, I should cut myself off and not overdo some of these simulations. So that's all I have time for questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right, we have some time for questions. Yes.
Yeah, how often does the MTA update their station entries? Like, is it for the last year, or do they give you up to date every day?
So you can get it historical data up to the day, hour, and complex. So if you go to the dashboard MTA provides, you can get the past few days data available to you. So very frequently.
How much of a difference does differences in capacity make aside from the G?
So another motivation I had for it was like the Grand Central Shuttle. It's a smaller train. Yeah, off the top of my head, I'd say, the variation in capacity for each line, including the shuttles, could be, maybe like 20%. But again, yeah, with my code, you can just take out that part and run everything without taking the capacity and see how it differs.
Hi, I'm new to New York City. Sorry, I'm here.
There.
I'm just wondering, how big of an impact do you think fare evaders have on this data, and can that be taken into account using origin destination differences?
Yeah, so the ridership data takes into account, estimated fare evasion. So that's included in these results.
Also, for the capacity of the trains, I just like off the top of my head, the 456 is a narrower gauge. Is that taken into consideration?
Yeah. So yeah, even though they have the same number of cars, the cars themselves are both a little bit not as long and are a little narrower. So yeah, I know for a fact that when I took capacity into account, the numbered lines went down in their yearly values.
Cool. And which train has the most capacity?
So it's a tie from for most of the B division. So most of the lettered lines.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
So can you refresh my memory? How did you apply the 1.69 link factor? Is it just like across the board, everything?
Yeah, it's across the board. And yeah, again, that's another way I know for a fact this is wrong. So if we take the shuttle lines in general, you're much more likely to transfer from those lines compared to others. My issue was I didn't have like a clear number to say this line has more transfers than another. So therefore, I just had to apply a blanket number across every value I found for the years.
Where did that number come from?
Yeah, that's a little difficult. There was a Wikipedia value I found, which came from the MTA results that the data that they sent to the National Transit Organization. There are different grains. There's all kinds of ways that it's not a perfect comparison, but to get a general value, that's what I've found.
I have two questions.
First, did MTA have origin destination survey?
Yeah, so I got the origin destination data from the MTA.
And considering all the shortcomings you mentioned earlier, I was wondering, would you be able to like calculate based on the overcrowdedness multiplied by like capacity and like how many trains per hour instead of station usage because of this express trains, people might transfer it, but you cannot catch it.
So I only have the overcrowdedness of a train for rush hour at the absolute peak. So, theoretically, if we had that for every line, you could include it. But again, that's just far too complicated for this little old data analyst here. Harper?
Can you calculate the percent of rides that are 1C rides?
In my project, no, because I apply this unlinked to linked ratio across the board. So theoretically, with the origin destination data set, you could. But again, that takes a lot of processing, going through all the combinations of routes one could take to get to your destination.
After pouring through all this data, spending a lot of time with it, are there any service changes you'd recommend?
Oh boy. No. Yeah, I'd leave it to the people who worked in that professionally in the room. I won't name names.
Two quick questions. One, how do you deal with the very large complexes? At Times Square, one can transfer. You can walk from 8th Avenue to 5th Avenue and catch different trains. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so using the frequency capacity of that station. So yes, you can walk between them. I believe that the MTA dataset has the 8th Avenue lines in one complex and the rest of Times Square in another. So I'm just taking into account like kind of the operations at each complex to divide them.
And the second one, probably silly. Is there any exit data available?
In terms of like which exit someone is going to?
No, in terms of bulk exits from stations.
Yeah, in the origin destination data set, you could, get the destinations per hour per complex.
Did you find any correlations of ridership with the number of stations on lines and or the ratio of local stations to complexes on lines?
So yeah, so like kind of after the fact stats, we have 20 stations on the one, how many riders per station? Yeah, I haven't thought of that. But yeah, that's a relatively simple one to do. Again, to challenge you on that question, are you counting weekday, weekends, late night?
Well, I mean, whether it's all weekdays or whether it's just the weekends, I'm just feeling like the local stations, because local stations are probably more apt to have more residentials on them. And because the number of stations that are there on the line are also people are entering in there, that's the only place they can enter to go into the system. I was just wondering if there was any kind of correlation with ridership based on the number of local or any kind of thing, either local to complex ratios or just number of local stations in general.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly could. You're taking into account the assumptions I already made. So, my hunch is that the local lines are overrepresented as is. So, if you're, as long as you know that going in, looking at the data, you could certainly do that kind of analysis.
One or two observations you had along the way. I'm sure line one having the highest ridership was one of them, but curious along the process.
Yeah, the frequency capacity was actually like the very initial question I had here, right? Because it intuitively just feels wrong. Like, wait, Schermerhorn, three trains they're not all created equal. So the L train frequency at rush hour is like insane. Compare that to the G train. So I used to live on the L, used to live on the G, now I live on the L. And it was, the G on its best day was like the L on its worst day, So yeah, that and just like the sheer number of people, we can move. So the biggest day-to-day example you might see is outside of a stadium, right? We cram tens of thousands of people into a specific space, and then we can disperse them, within a half hour. Like, it's pretty impressive. And the reason why, we have the stadiums where we do in New York City.
Thanks for your talk. One thing that stuck out to me was you said the line with the highest late night ridership was the F. So I grew up on that line, and I was wondering, I mean, this might be beyond the scope, but just curious your thoughts about what that might be proxy for. Is that based on the neighborhoods that it's serving and the amount of potentially late night workers, or, could you speak to what you think, just your observations, even just outside of the 1 and the 6, the fact the 7 and the F are 3rd and 4th. And like you said, late night ridership, the F serving, from Jamaica to Coney Island, like, if you don't mind commenting on that.
Yeah, sure. So some of the late night ridership results are extremely obvious. The B doesn't run on late nights, so nothing. The F actually gains stations, like the route gets longer at late night because it's entirely local, at least recently. So at least within scope, I could say like it just has the longest route, and it kind of siphons off ridership from those local stations that don't get served overnight. But again, yeah, I think I'd leave it to you guys to hypothesize, beyond that. What destinations, late night workers, like you said, all decent theories.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Do we have online questions? I don't want to.
Okay. There's a question about the 42nd Street shuttle. Most people using the 42nd Street shuttle don't enter at either Grand Central Terminal or Times Square, which makes your number a little bit unrealistically low. How do you account for that?
I agree. Yeah. So, and then we did have the ridership data for the 42nd Street shuttle, and mine was about half, I think, at least in rush hour. But yeah, if you have a systematic way to correct for this, feel free to let me know.